Hello my beautiful badges, Messi Coder back again. Have you ever wanted to move away from built-in and start playing with HDRP or URP but scared that the world will explode? Well, do not worry, have no fear. Jason Booth, Unity Shader Legend, is back with me on a live dev interview to talk about his new assets, better shaders for Unity and better lit shader. So sit back, enjoy, and I'll see you all in a second. Hello?
Hey.
How you doing?
All right.
You're live, don't say fudge or bugger.
Okay. Fudge.
You know you've got your camera on.
We don't make mistakes.
Yeah, I'm trying to find the screen sharing here.
Can I share your camera? Thank you, Ocular Manis, from the sub, buddy.
It says it should be screen sharing. Are you seeing my screen?
I am seeing your screen. The brilliant part was I was seeing your screen and the inception of your own video inside the screen as well.
The infinite scroll there.
Infinite
recursion.
Can I then? Is it safe for me to share what you're showing?
Yeah.
All right. Let me work out how to do it because when I did it with Skype, I had a magic Skype window for doing it. And last time it exploded. So let's try. How you been, by the way? What you been up to?
I don't know. I've just been working and got the second shot. I'm all recovered from that, and so I've started seeing people and having life again and kind of gearing up for the summer.
Oh, you're immune.
Yeah, I'm invincible now.
How does that make you feel?
Like going and seeing my friends and getting back to live music. I've been dying without live music, so it's like the whole other side of my life.
But the social, like, online replacement of live interaction hasn't been good enough?
Oh, what? All the video stuff? No.
Yeah.
No, not the same. I watch concerts with my friends online. I have a lot of friends from the concert scene and stuff, and we've been going through like recordings we did 25 years ago of various bands and stuff, and so that's been fun, but it's not the same thing, you know.
Well, I'm going to try and make this smaller. It's not a problem I normally have in life. If I edit a transform.
Is that what she said?
She has never said that. Tell you that for nothing. Can I ask you a question?
What's that?
What is the slip stuff? Is it music related?
Yeah, it is. So I have been as far as Japan with a band called The Slip. And they toured around, like they stopped touring as that band a few, what was it, like maybe 10 years ago? And now it's the two brothers, or the Barr brothers, who are really big in Europe and Canada. And actually did the soundtrack for a game. Well, they did it for a Walking Dead game I was in. They were in Guitar Hero and Rock Band, of course. But they did the soundtrack for
We don't make mistakes.
We Happy Few.
No way! I love the soundtrack to We Happy Few.
Yeah, so they got asked to be a '60s band in this psychedelic world, and they actually made an album of it all, which is a great album. And it's basically like the Barr brothers and another guy who composed it all and recorded it. Also, a lot of the copyright-free music you find on YouTube is done by a bunch of friends of mine, especially through the pandemic. They've all found refuge by recording music for YouTube, essentially. So they're all under other names and stuff. But yeah, I have a very large music friends group and stuff because I went to music school and stuff. So yeah, I'm kind of deeply in that scene as well.
Cool, my word. Thank you very much, Kilda, for the continued support. Another 900 years subscribed in a row. Thank you, buddy. You're awesome. Do you know what, Jace? Like, we need to do the proper intro. So you ready for it?
Okay. Sure.
Everybody sitting at home in front of your Amazon watches, your Google microwaves, your Alexa slippers, give a warm and messy welcome to the slipster that is Jason Booth. Buddy, welcome back. It's your 500th time on the show. How you?
Seems like it. I mean, I got to do marketing somehow, right?
I love how you regard this as your one need to get out and do any marketing. Your love of marketing shines through so much, I have to say. And you do such a good job of it, because it's only in my Discord that I'm told when you've got a new asset out. Because I in my Discord and I got sent a message, hey, have you seen Jason's got another asset out? I'm like, what? Really?
Yeah,
when did that happen?
I just kind of focus on the work and on making cool stuff and figure it's either going to catch or it's not. And, you know, I remember one day I was walking through an airport and there was a sign from some company that was like basically saying they could change consumer behavior to sell your product. And I was like, that is just so backwards from how I think about making things.
Wow.
You know, it's not make something really important or really cool. It's like, oh, you made something that's kind of mediocre. Okay, well, we can change how everybody thinks about life to make sure it sells. You know,
well, that's a good company if they can do that.
They can do it, but still, it just seems like,
should they?
I don't know, the back approach. Right. Even if you can do it, should you do it? Probably not. You know.
Oh my word! Can I just explain to everyone how good Jason is at advertising his up and coming products? He messaged me a while back on Discord to say, I'm working on some amazing stuff. It's going to blow your mind. Wait until I show you what I'm working on. And I was like, wow.
You did not say it was going to blow your mind.
Oh yeah, it was like that. It was. You're gonna blow my mind. It was like you were like, really, you know, this is actually, I think your exact words are, it's going to blow your mind. And I was like, this is awesome. What is it? What is it? And then that was it. You refused to tell me anymore. You never messaged me again. I kept messaging you, what is this thing that's going to blow my mind? And you never came back. It's like, what is it? I need to know. That's how good you are at marketing. You set the seed into people's heads, and then you just run off giggling into the woods. Oh. So what was the thing that was going to... Is the better shader the thing going to blow my mind? Because you were working on a music thing as well at the time, you told me.
Yeah, I kind of stopped working on that just because I started contacting various friends of mine who are, you know, composers with their own studios and stuff, and they all seemed to just have so much work. They were all like into doing it, but I was like, I'm gonna have to herd like 20 cats for this project versus just doing my own thing. And so if they're not hurting, whatever, we'll do something else. You know, like, because I figured with the pandemic they were, you know, nobody's touring, like they'll have plenty of time, but they all seem to find work, so it's like, okay. So yeah, I've been working on that lately. The two things I've released lately is Better Shaders and then the Better Lit Shader, which are basically Better Shaders is an abstraction for SRPs. It's what Unity should have built but didn't. And so you can write shaders and basically you can even stack them together to create new shaders. So you can kind of just like say, I want this one and put them together, and then you get a new shader. And then it'll cross-compile those to all of the SRP pipelines. So it'll basically, there's 5 pipelines it supports now because you have 2019. Yeah, well, because 2019 HDRP is totally different than 2020 HDRP.
No
way.
Really?
Yes. Yeah, they change a lot of stuff and it breaks everything, and then you got to support all the new stuff they added. And because there's no abstraction layer, right? Everything breaks on every version that they change. And so what I've done is, you know, I had all the Microsplat running on all the pipelines, and I realized, like, oh God, I'm gonna have to rewrite it all again. And I was like, you know what? I might as well just rewrite it in a general way so that other people can use it, right? So that they can write shaders, and then while I'm there, I'll like make shaders better to author than they are currently. I'll like fix a bunch of things, improve things like includes, and allow you to like graphically stack shaders and stuff like that. And so I basically spent a bunch of time writing that, and then to kind of proof it out, I built the Better Lit shader on that system. And that system does let you ship to the asset store so that people don't need to install better shaders. They don't have to have that asset to use the output of that assets.
Which is
and
critical, because that's the question
Yeah.
somebody asked me on an email, because they were like, well, I can't go to HDRP, I haven't got a clue what I'm doing. And I'm like, you need JSON Booth. They said, well, I can't use it and sell my assets, but you can.
Well, you can. In fact, Vegetation Studio is now shipping all their shaders on it. Space Graphics Toolkit, City 3D, Paint in 3D. There's a bunch of assets that are now shipping using better shaders to author their assets instead of having to manually port between all the pipelines. So it's really something Unity should have built, and I screamed at Unity for like 5 years to build it, and they basically just ignored everyone and let everyone suffer. And so then when I realized I was going to have to do all this work anyway, and I'd reached a point where I really couldn't ship any other shader-based products because I had these adapters for Microsplat, right? And so I just kept making new Microsplat modules because I couldn't write anything outside of that code base because it would mean dealing with the SRPs all over again. So this was kind of the thing that allows me to now start writing more shader products. And it also, for companies that work across SRPs or even just want to be able to write handwritten shaders there's a lot of things you can't do in a shader graph, or you end up like hacking around things in a shader graph. And so this just lets you write shaders much, much easier. It also lets artists visually stack shaders so they can be like, you know what, I just want like this wind effect, I want this Vegetation Studio instancing, and I want this space shader. Let's put those together, and they can just do that graphically and create new shaders that way.
Wow.
So it's a big improvement on traditional shader authoring. It's really kind of like takes surface shaders to a 2.0 mark and kind of adds a bunch of new things that make shader authoring much nicer overall. And I think the Better Lit shader is actually an example of that, of why the system works so well. What's funny about it is that the total lines of shader code are not much. I think I'd have to like go count them up, but it's probably similar to the number of lines of code there is just to make the editor, right? So the amount of shader code is very compact. But one of these shaders, when you compile it to, say, HDRP 2020, it's 45,000 lines of code. So instead of writing 45,000 lines of code, I'm writing like 2,000, and I'm writing them in a very modular, easy to work with way.
Wow. I mean, I remember 4 months ago when you were last on the stream 4 months ago. That's how quickly you work. We were just chatting about how you are basically having to work behind the scenes on things that Unity should be doing. And
yes.
You feel like, oh, you know what, I might end up doing this for the public one day. And here you are, 4 months later.
What I would like to have done was release it for free, but it basically takes all of the SRP nightmare that Unity has just dumped onto developers and dumps it on me. So I need to get paid for it. And that's why it's an asset. It'll never make up the work for the work that I put into it, like in terms of because the audience member for people who write handwritten shaders is much smaller than the number of Unity users, right? But because it allows me to launch new products, I might actually break even by launching more products that do well, right?
It's a foundation that's going to let you be more flexible in the future.
Yeah. Can you guys see my screen?
I can. I can see it, and the quality is actually good. I can even read the writing on there. Can I go into chat? Fresh Meat's just popped in. Ocular Mind says that you've been blowing mine since 2020. I think he's been blowing mine since 1999, 97. Hey all, damn, I made it. Fresh Meat says he got power back minutes ago, just in time. Son Goku. Fresh Meat also says, Jason, I love you. Aww. So Goku says, will you add the idea I had about the texture atlas I asked 15 days ago? The one with the columns and rows in the texture, and to mix them to get a non-repetitive texture would also be good for
Yeah, I mean,
stylistic
I
textures.
would want to see to add that I would want to have some example asset that really makes use of it well. The stochastic that I have in there is great for organic surfaces. It's not going to work for like tiling brick patterns, but tiling brick patterns, like you should make them like if you're doing things that are going to tile pixel accurate when you atlas them down, then you're better off like using noise over that, like I've done with this brick wall here. This is much more interesting than you're going to get from that kind of an atlas thing because you can have larger and smaller sort of structures to it. So my thing with that idea is like I realize other assets have done it or whatever, but I've not seen a use case result that I thought was like, wow, that's so good that that's the technique you need to use to get that result. You know what I mean? So it's one of those things where I'm like kind of on the edge about it. The other thing with Better Lit in particular is I'm running out of shader keywords because I don't want to use any global keywords because when you do that, you end up with a project maximum, and then people have to like go cull shaders in their project. I'm trying to only use local, and there's only 64 available, and so I've used most of those. So I'm at the point where I'm like, okay, what I add, I have to be careful about. And so I have some, because with Microspat, I can add an endless number of features because I have my own shader compiler for it, right? With this, I don't because I'm relying on better shaders to compile the shaders and ship them as like final shaders to the asset store. So it's a little more traditional. So I have some limits I have to kind of stick with, from Unity's limits.
Ocular Malice sounds neat. I'm a coder though, and shaders are like regex to me. I can't relate to that because I love regular expressions. But shaders it's like a weird black magic.
A lot of people think that. I think they're the most fun thing to program. And I think the two things that I always tell people that make them realize how they work the best. When you think about an image, you think about like, oh, I have this big grid, I'm going to draw an image on it, right? That's not how shaders work. Shaders, basically, it's a program. There's two main programs you're worried about. One which says, I'm a vertex, where should I be? And then there's another one that's like, I'm a pixel, what color should I be? Okay. And so they tend to work opposite from the way people think. You get passed in information about like where you are in a texture or where your pixel position is or your vertex position is, and then you transform that to where you want it to be, or derive a color from that. And so I think a lot of people expect it to be more like C++ or C# programming where you'd like loop through the pixels of an image, right? But it's just a little inverted from how people think. But once you get your head around it, I think it's the most fun programming you can do.
That's because you're sick, Jace. That's because you're sick. Didn't you used to do training? You used to offer shade like a class, shader class.
Well, when I worked at Harmonix, one of the things I did there was I built the shader graph for them, and I also built like the visual scripting language, and I was in charge of the engine design. So I was building their whole like components and entities and all that stuff, and prefabs. And so with each engine release, we had our internal teams that were working on different games, and so we'd try to figure out the right features for all the games and stuff, and roll out the new features. And I would go out and present them all, and then teach classes on how they all worked and run people through various things. And then at Disruptor Beam, I also did other shader classes to teach people how to write shaders, because it's when you have a studio where everybody can write shaders, your games just get way more efficient and way more visually interesting. I would when we first got the shader graph, I'd go and look at these projects. We were working on like a Fantasia game at the time, and I remember it had this planet, and they had like animated all this stuff on the CPU with like traditional animations and stuff. And I ended up, it was, taking a bunch of time. It was really painful to work with because you had like hundreds of bones and I just replaced it all with like a shader, and it was like super easy, did the exact same thing, looked the same, and ran super fast, And so then I would take those as like examples and go walk through with the team how to build things using a GPU-centric model of programming, so that that knowledge would get shared. And then the team would start building its own effects that way, and then your games just get better, right? Like when you only think the way a CPU thinks, then you're very limited in terms of what you can do in your game compared to if you understand how a GPU works and how to program it. For Kerbal Space Program, we rewrote. I worked with Leonard, who does Vegetation Studio. We rewrote their whole planet rendering system, so it's all GPU centric, and went from 300 milliseconds to cross like a new LOD to like one millisecond per frame. We construct the entire planet in that time. Because all in compute shaders and super fast and efficient. And then we didn't need to amortize it. The code was simpler. Like, it just works out better, right? Because if you're stuck with just doing CPU stuff, you often run into things that the CPU doesn't do well. And so then you're like, oh, we need to thread this and we need to do all these things to make it fast. And if you just learned how the GPU worked, you might not need to do any of that. So, so yeah, I mean, a lot of my work involves moving things to the GPU from the CPU, because a GPU for certain tasks is just going to blow it out of the water thousands of times faster. It's like having thousands of cores, right? They're not as big and beefy as the CPU cores, but you've got thousands of them. So
lots of little friends helping you out.
Yeah, and if you have to do a lot of the same thing, with vertices and things like that, then it works really well. So I should probably show some of this stuff off that we're kind of looking at here.
You should, because Black Mage is it looks so cool, though. It does
so
look cool.
This is an example of procedural damage. And what we have here, this is the better lit shader. And if I open this guy up, let me move the little...
And just to remind people, if you've got better lit shader, you don't need to have better shaders.
No, you don't. Better Shaders is an authoring platform, and I just kind of kept the better name for a bunch of shaders I'm planning to write for it. Like I don't know which ones I'll ship, but I started a stylized one, and I might do a vegetation one. Kind of tinkering with those now to see what I want to do with them. But just to go over some of this really quick. So the first thing, the kind of idea behind this product was to do a better version of the URP lit shader, or the standard shader, because HDRP has this really nice shader with all these really nice features, but it's wed to this very heavyweight pipeline that's a little too much for a lot of people to build on. And so a lot of people are using URP, but then they have a shader that's based out of like technology from 15 years ago. Like, it doesn't pack any of the textures. So if you want, full PBR mapping and height and a height map and everything, then you're looking at using 5 different textures. Well, you can pack those textures together and you can have a much more performant shader. You can pack them down to either 2 or 3 textures in better shaders. And so that speeds up your shader a lot. And then we can add all these effects onto it, like having multiple layers like you would in the HDRP. They have a stack lit, so you can do things like that. But now you can do it all in URP. You can do it in standard, and you can do it in HDRP. And in fact, if you move from any of those pipelines, it all just works because it's the same shader. Unlike Unity shaders, which are all different on every platform. So, and I added a bunch of stuff for like low end and high end features in here. So for instance, in this example, we have the main texture layer here, and I have this plaster on this layer, right? And I've set this in the Unity like HDRP style packing, where you use an albedo map with a height map in the alpha channel, a normal map, and then what they call a mask map, which I think is badly named because mask is such a general term, but I went with it because that's what Unity describes it as.
So and that basically
has, it's a map with smoothness, ambient occlusion, a detail mask, and what's the other one I'm missing? And there's another thing in it, but it's basically 4 textures packed into one. So you only have to sample it once instead of sampling 4 textures, right? And I have another mode here, which you can switch the texture packing here from Unity to fastest, and that packs it all into 2 textures. You don't get a metallic map, but for a lot of surfaces, that's fine. And so here I have your basic layer here, right? And it's stochastic sampled, which is kind of pointless on this. It doesn't tile that bad, but that kills all tiling. And then on texture layer 0 here, which is like the first texture layer, extra texture layer, I am height blending in this brick texture, and I'm using noise to break up where it happens. Okay, so if I turn off the noise, you don't get anything. But as I change this noise, the amplitude, I can change the center to move it, or rather to change the center point of the noise. You'll get more and more more or less bricks, or I can change the frequency if I want like smaller, damage areas or whatever I want, right? And there's some effects in here for like this. This is a layer blend tint, and so it will tint the area inside this mask. And so you can use that to kind of add some darkening to kind of make it look more damaged in those areas. And yeah, and so each of these texture layers, you get up to 4 of them. They can have their own. They can be triplanar. They can be UV. They can be projected. And in this case, I'm just using the UVs, but for the actual original texture, I'm using triplanar. So they're all independent, and you can mix and match them however you want. And what I'm doing is I'm actually doing the noise in world space in this case. So when I move this guy, you can see that you get different noises. So if you're laying out a road network and you want damage in the roads, you could use two versions of the texture or an overlay texture, and then you can like blend in damage and use the world space noise to make it different over the whole level, or to make every wall crack differently, right? And so that's a really fast way to build up effects for, if you're doing like a post-apocalyptic world or something like that. You can basically just apply these things to your materials, and then everything gets a unique look. And there's lots of options here. I'm kind of an option nut, but like with noise, you can use a texture-based noise. There's also stuff like this layer weights here, where if you turn this on, you can basically paint, like you would with Microspat or something, and you can paint in vertex colors to control it. Or if you have a texture, you can use that to control the weights of these multiple layers you have here. And then I also have all the stuff for like wetness, puddles, snow, wind, track support if you want to drive over it with something and have it leave trails and dissolve. And you can see some of these here, like there's triplanar, we have snow on the top. This is just moss done on the top of these rocks. And again, I'm just using a second texture layer here, except instead of using noise, I'm using the height value to filter it. And so if we look at our second texture layer, it has this angle height filter on it. And we can actually use this to basically put stuff just on the tops of the rocks, or we can invert it to only put it on the bottom, right? And so you can use these types of techniques to build up these procedural surfaces that are going to, not necessarily tile. This is an example of height blending. So I just have 2 different surfaces here, all in the same material. And the second one is height blended with the first one. And, I can change the height of that. I can go paint the height of that if I want to, change the contrast, etc. So yeah, just lots of techniques to basically procedurally texture things. It supports tessellation. It also has a form of crack-free tessellation. Detail texturing, again, using the HDRP style detail texturing. But again, on the detail texturing, you could do the detail texturing as triplanar, but have the main thing be UV mapped if you're doing like a rock. And what you want is like, okay, I'm going to use the normal map from the overall rock. But then I want to tile like this detail noise inside of it, right? This is tint masking. So if you've got characters and you want to, you might have like a character who has armor, okay? And you might want to set a different tint for where the leather is versus where the cloth is versus where the metal is. And so you could paint a tint mask that maps those. And then if you look on the tint mask here, you get 4 colors to tint those individual areas. So you can use that to like get cheap variations on like armor and things like that, or just by just feeding it some new colors but with the same textures.
See, that's the only thing I've ever expanded my shader life with. Is when, do you remember when I was doing that ill-fated character creation asset, Messi's ultimate character creator, and I was like, well, when you're changing your beard or your skin, I made my custom shader that you have to make a mask and then go, right, which is the red bit and the blue bit,
right?
Right.
I tell you,
it drove me nuts. Thank you so much. And it drove me nuts. So now you've got You've got it all with the kitchen sink in this
Yes.
pack. So I don't have to sit there anymore and have to make my own custom shaders that someone's going to be annoyed because
I mean,
of
there's
my
no
little.
value in writing custom shaders, right?
But
But
not if it only does like one little thing that you lose a load of other funky stuff. Because we had that question in the
right.
Discord. Like,
Well,
what is the point of making a custom shader if there's something already better out there, or Unity already does it better? Why asset developers, asset publishers, releasing their art assets with their idea of a custom shader that doesn't actually, it's not worth having, and then
well,
that's just having people want to remove it from their asset.
right. So the reason they do that is because they don't want to ship and then require another asset for their asset to be valuable, right? So they make their own version that does just the bit they want. And you'll see this a lot, like with terrain tools that have their own version of a terrain shader, but then they have like Polaris has their own terrain shader, but then he came to me and was like, hey, can we integrate like Microspat into this? Because I don't want to spend the rest of my life trying to make like a terrain shader that does all the stuff yours does. And so it's like, yeah, okay, let's integrate them. But he still has to ship one because people want to use his package and they don't want to have to buy mine just to be able to use it, right? So I think you'll still see that practice coming. But the real reason to write your own shaders is control. And for a minute, let's just get into how better shaders work, okay? And so this here in the source code directory of Better Lit these are all the source code files for the Better Lit shader. And if I open up one of these, like let's open up the tint mask we were just looking at. And can you guys see my text, or do I need to make it bigger?
Make it a little bit bigger. Let me put my glasses on.
All right.
Oh, Barack Dub asked a question. We can come back to it later. He wants can you explain UV mode shaders for shader newbies? We'll come back to it later.
Sure. Yeah, we can get into that. But so here is the tint mask shader, okay? And essentially this is in the Better Shaders format. And so there's some stuff up here about how to use its editor, what its name should be. Here's the properties. It has a tint mask. It has 4 colors that you can set. It has a block for turning on and off the feature, essentially. And then it declares the variables. And then this is the entirety of the code for the tint mask right here. Okay, so that's this feature. This is all it takes. And if you look at Better Lit Dev, this is the actual like top level shader. All it does is bring in that shader. And this is like a Photoshop stack of shaders. So first it's going to do the base lit shader. Then it's going to do the tint mask over that. Then it's going to do this layer weight provider. And then it's going to do 3 texture layers, right? Those three texture layers that we're allowed to do anything. Tracks, puddles, snow, wind, double-sided, finalizer, whatever. So if I want to add something new to this, I can just write the functionality and just add it here, and then boom, it'll have that functionality added. I don't have to go edit all the original stuff. I can stack these shaders. And users can actually stack these too. If I go to some of the samples in the Better Shaders, let me just open that guy up for a second. Here's its demo scene. So if we look at this shader, for instance, this shader is actually done from a bunch of elements that I include in the system, and then just graphically stacked using the UI. So here I have a bunch of stackables for different effects, and then if we go into stacked here, let's look at this one. This is the actual one here. So it says I'm going to take tessellation, I'm going to add moss, puddles, and a UV shear, which is what's bending the UVs, and then I'm going to do a wind. So I can just add more shaders here, and I can just be like, great, let me just add another UV shear, and let me add another wind. And then if we hit apply, this guy compiles. Now I select this shader, or rarely the material. And here now what we see, and this isn't as nice as an interface is Better Lit, but see, here's my first wind particles, and here's my second one. And I can go ahead and add another wind here. And let's start with the strength.
That's enhanced.
So here we see a totally different wind, right? And I can go to my shear, the second shear I added, and I can go ahead and let me just turn up the strength on this guy, bend that guy, right? So I can just stack as many of these little functional shaders as I need to create the effect that I want. I don't have to go and modify the original shaders. And that's one of the big, like, powerful features I added to the shader compiler for better shaders, is this idea that shaders are now stackable. And if I want to integrate Curved World or Vegetation Studio or any of these things into my shader, all I do is just add it to the stack.
We got,
so for instance,
sorry, carry on.
It's stackable Vegetation Studio instancing here. If you add that to your stack, you now support Vegetation Studio's instancing model. And you don't have to go and add that to your shader code or anything. If you want to add flat shading, you add that to your stack, right? And so these stacks can be built, you know, from code, like the way I did for Better Lit, or they can be built visually by a user if they have better shaders installed. And so this is what I really think that Unity should have built for the base of their shader framework. Their shader graph should have written to something like this. And what I'd like to do long term is get Amplify or some other shader editor, if there was a good one, to output their stuff to this format, so that then it doesn't matter if you as a programmer want to write this really tight, you know, good shader for the base of your functionality, but then you can leave like the shading of the actual, you know, coloring and things like that up to the artist who wants to use a shader graph. Then they can build their stuff in a shader graph. You can build your stuff in a tight, you know, handwritten shader, and it doesn't matter. You can just stack them together and use what functionality from whatever tool you want, right?
Is there a cap to like how many you can stack, or is there no, like, it doesn't impact performance, doesn't impact memory or anything like that?
It doesn't have any impact. So what happens is internally it just sequences the functions together. So it just calls one after another. But when the thing about HLSL and shader languages is they're actually really low-level languages. They don't actually, functions get inlined, you know, structures and packing of structures, that all goes away, and then it strips any code that's not used. So what happens is all this function overhead that you would have in C# doesn't exist in shaders at all. So it just takes your functions and actually builds. And actually, if I just, let me just export one of these and I'll show you, or I can show you from the template what it does. It's a stupid trick. Where are we going here?
Tricks.
Let me just, okay, I'm going to export that one we just created, and I'm going to export it for the, let me just give you an idea. This is for HDRP. I'm going to give you an idea of how much code.
I love that you can just
HDRP
choose the drop down and go, oh, I'm going to choose this one today.
Right. So it made an HDRP 2020 shader. And to give you an idea, let's just see how many lines of shader code this ends up being. Now, if I wrote this by hand, I would get it smaller than this, but it's 19,000 lines of code. And that's because there's so much just boilerplate crap in the HDRP and the SRP pipelines. And yeah, it's just a lot of crap. But internally what it does, you can see here this X surface function 3, right? So it takes your surface function and it just goes, call the first one. Okay, call the second one, call the third one, call the fourth one, call the fifth one, sixth, seventh, right? And then it just does that up your stack. So, and because there's no function overhead, all this stuff gets inlined. Effectively, it all boils out to be exactly as if you had written this shader with all of this code sequenced together the way you've put it in the stack. But, you know, you can also go back to this thing and be like, you know what, I want to like change the order of this. I want to like move this guy up, or I want to like just get rid of these things here or change them or whatever, and compose your shader however you want. Right.
Well, we had a couple of points in chat. Oculus Spurs asked, so I have to write my own shader in HLSL with the Better Shaders package? Question mark.
Better Shaders is for people that want to write HLSL shaders.
Because
Better Lit Shader is a shader package.
And he says, yeah, Better Shaders isn't really for me then. I'll never write a shader in my life. I just cannibalize other people's efforts. Winky face. So I think that, because you mentioned about if hooking up with Amplify, to be able to
Yeah.
output to that. So, but what if I've gone and got somebody else's shader that was included in an asset I purchased? Am I able to then load up better shaders and then take advantage of that and go, okay, I'm just going to now
if it's written in better shader format.
No, like
right?
if it's just an old one and I want to convert it now into a better shader.
You'd have to do the conversion. I have a video on YouTube of me converting a surface shader into better shaders. It's not terribly hard, but it does need conversion.
Do you need to know what you're doing?
You need to know how to write shaders, I would say. You don't necessarily need to know every little detail of the code you're converting. But I don't consider better shaders to be a package for people who are like, yeah, I'd like to learn how to write shaders. Like if you're going to learn shaders and you have no previous experience and maybe you're not the best coder, then a graph makes a lot of sense for you. After you've done a lot of stuff in a graph, it'll start to make sense, and then you might be like, you know what, I need to do this thing with compute shaders and I can't do it in the graph, and so I'm going to move over to like writing shaders in code, and that's where better shaders is really nice, because you don't have to think about pipelines or anything. This same shader, like right now I'm running in, what am I in, URP. If I want to boot this up, I don't know, let's do it in URP. Here's Better Lit. Where's Better Lit? I have so many projects. Oh my God.
Hope you're not showing anything you shouldn't be showing.
Whatever.
You should name your projects NDA #1, NDA #2. By the way, Warspawn saying, so when are you going to write better universal render pipeline?
I mean, that's basically what I've done. I've done it for the shader side of things. I haven't done it for like... It
spells BURP, dude.
Yeah. I mean, better shader spells BS, so that's not... because that's what I think of the SRPs and the way Unity is implemented.
I was about to ask you, is the day ever going to come where Unity go, you know what, we'll just put better shaders in we'll just take it, we'll just buy it off you?
I mean, that would be great. I would love for this to be standard, or at least something like this, because the only thing that made me build this is just incredible frustration and realizing like I couldn't build products without building this first. And, quite frankly, it didn't take that long to build. I worked off the knowledge that I've reverse engineered their pipelines, because they don't document anything and they just try to make it hard for us or something. I don't know why they're so stodgy about like not documenting anything, but they are. So here we go. Here we're running in, in built-in instead. So yeah, I can run in all these pipelines together and stuff. Big thing that's different is lighting, because the handle light's different in each pipeline. But what was I saying? Oh, but the irony of all this, right, is it probably took me less time to write better shaders as a person who doesn't have inside access to what they're doing with the render pipelines and all this stuff than it did for them to write the stupid material converter that doesn't work half the time. They probably spent more time on that than I did on making the three pipelines compatible. And,
Yeah, but you are shader legend Jason Booth.
Yeah, but they got guys who are just as good as I am, if not better. I mean, they got plenty of good shader writers. They can do this. They don't have the institutional focus to do it for some reason. I don't know why. It doesn't make any sense to me, but they just decided they weren't going to do this, and they're sticking their feet in the ground and dumping all of the work of this onto other people. And so the only way that work goes away is if somebody makes a product to make it go away, and then people have the option of using that. Like every time they release a new version of HDRP or any of the SRPs, like hundreds of studios have to go and then figure out what changed and then like fix all of their stuff, or they have to just not write any shaders other than using the shader graph, and that doesn't even port up all the time. So, it's just a real nightmare scenario for especially for studios that are large enough to do custom work, but maybe don't have enough time to have like a full-time graphics programmer deal with porting up Unity versions. I just took the bullet and said, you know what, if I'm going to be doing this anyway for my own stuff, I've kind of like figured out most of the pipelines at this point. I'll be the janitor who's stuck cleaning up their mess, and people who use my stuff will be able to avoid having to deal with it. So, and that's why, Vegetation Studio and Space Graphics Toolkit and all these things are starting to use my stuff, because using Unity's is a frigging nightmare. So,
I love the fact that everyone you mentioned so far has been on the show for a chat, except for Len. I can never get Len out to come on. No matter what I do, if I give him cookies, he won't do it. So one day I'll get Len on. One day it will happen. So we got a question from Sugoku. If I don't ask it, he will hunt me down and kill me. Will you add the snow noise to Microsplat so snow grows differently depending on the noise, and also melts differently with another noise to give it a more realistic look?
Yeah, I'm probably going to backport a couple things from Betterlit to Microsplat. One is the procedural puddles. So Microsplat, you have to paint the puddles where you want them. And there's some tooling to help make it not terrible. But with this, it's just a noise function. So if you come into here, and then you change the noise frequency, you can see that like you get, world space puddles, and then you can, just change all the factors that bring them in and out however you want.
That is a much nicer way.
Yeah. So
you can even have it then in runtime increasing, with the amount of rain over time.
You can change the size of them instead of just the opacity. Now, changing the opacity does kind of effectively change the size, right? So they will do that in Microsplat, but you don't have to go paint them and decide where they go. That'll still be an option, of course. So that's definitely going to get a port back. The snow noise might too. I mean, once you've written the code, it's not that hard to be like, okay, let me add it to this thing too. And it's good to have them all matched. Like the fact that this weather stuff all kind of matches Microsplat. And for instance, I have a tracks integration here. So if you want to build surfaces and then have tracks work with it from Microsplat, it will. And I also made it so that tracks can run without Microsplat at all. It can now run entirely by itself. So if you're not using Microsplat, but you still want to leave footsteps in the snow or whatever, you can do all of that with the Betterlit stuff. And then this tracks, module, if you have your own custom shader and you're writing all these custom shaders, you can just drop that into your stack, and now you have track support, right? So it's very easy for you with better shaders to just take a bunch of different modules of like, oh, yeah, I wrote this really cool shader, but now it needs snow, it needs rain, it needs, all these things. And you can just drag them in, and then boom, they're all part of your shader now. And you don't have to like manage that whole thing, which I guess if you've never written shaders, you wouldn't realize. Like usually what you have to do is like take all the code and merge it into the other shader, and then take all the properties and the C buffers and all the editor code and everything and just drop it in. With this system, you can just like drag them onto each other, and you're like, cool, done.
We've got chat asking. I've got a few people. I want puddles with certain terrain height range. So can you height blend them with the terrain? The puddles that is. So everyone wants their puddles.
You mean like puddles only exist at above 200 meters kind of thing?
Is that what you're asking, chat? Or you're asking like, make puddles in the gaps, in the low bits of your terrain, like, you've got a little valley, like you've got some terrain that's got a little bump in it, and then you've got puddles in between the bumps.
They do actually integrate with the height map. If you look at the example in Better Shaders here, where's my example scene?
Nobody wants a puddle on top of a bump, do they?
So if you look at the example here, the ocean here is just puddles, right? This is just just puddles integrating with the height field, and I have the tessellation on. So yeah, you can totally decide where in the height field the puddles should be so that they won't appear on the tops of bumpy surfaces and stuff like that.
And when you get this rolled into Microsplat, that's going to work with Microsplat.
Well, Microspat already does that.
Oh, so this is already in Microsplat already.
Yeah, the thing that isn't the idea of placing it via noise instead of painting, like, right, of determining like, hey, this is where I want puddles, but placing them via like a noise function.
No, cool.
So,
so everyone's happy and
just like as I make improvements to one, it's like, well, I'll move this back to the other one because it might be useful there too. And you'll notice that the same thing with the wind. The wind won't go over the tops of the mountains here. You can see how it sort of fades off on the tops of them. And there's a wind height thing here. Wind texture height, right? So if I lower this down, you'll see that it, right, it only appears in the valley versus the top. So yeah, I have all those kinds of controls, and you know, I'm a total control junkie. I love having like all the little things you might want to tweak, which is not always the best for the asset store because people just like, they kind of want something that slaps on and they don't have to think about it. But I like my tools to be powerful.
I suppose more control can be scary at first, but then as soon as you start playing with something, you're like, oh, it doesn't do exactly what I want because it's not flexible enough. Well, if you wanted more control, you shouldn't have been scared.
Right. Well, you know, I mean, I have a problem now in that when I originally launched Microsplat, you downloaded the free module and then you bought the modules you want. And now what's happening is most people are just buying one of the big bundles. And so the first interface they see is like, you know, this massive collection of tools, right? And so they have a very different first-time experience than somebody who just started with the base package and extended. And one of the things I liked about the modules was that it meant that you were presented with something very simple at first, and then you could grow it over time. But you know, with the bundles and things, it sort of flips that, right? Where now you get like this massive amount of options right from the start. And so I find often that people don't know where to start as well, you know, because they have too many things in front of them. So,
do you get the payment? Like if I bought one module and then I buy another module, am I able to then when I upgrade to the bundle, go, oh look, because I bought like make your own bundle kind of thing. I bought 1 and 2.
The store supports 1-to-1 upgrades. It doesn't support like many-to-one, and the new bundling system is basically just kind of a hack on the store side to be like, hey, if you buy this, you get licenses to all of these, but they don't really have any kind of like concept of, oh, this is actually part of something, right? You know, like for me personally, I would love it if you bought the ultimate bundle and you could hit download and get it all in one shot, but you actually have to go to each thing and download it, which is annoying. But you know, I mean, I get the sense that the asset store is very limited in its budget of what it can do, and so they're trying to figure out ways to make the store better under very limited development time, which is unfortunate because it's a big part of Unity.
I thought it'd be making loads of the money from that, but when they released their financials, you're like, oh, I see.
Well, compared to a corporate license of something, getting 30% of one of my assets is not a big deal.
Yeah, exactly.
And you know, most Unity users don't use the asset store, so you know, it's probably only like a couple, I don't know, maybe 10% that do.
So hearing how Unity is so disappointing in how they develop and support their software, is Unity even worth working in?
I mean, every engine has its problems. I think Unity has some real advantages that they've introduced over the last couple of years with things like burst and jobs. Being able to write C# that's highly performant is really nice compared to having to do, like if you're in C++, you have to write all of that job framework yourself, or you know, find something that works for you, and there's a bunch of trade-offs, and you can hang yourself really easy with that stuff. With like burst and jobs, it's super easy to write that kind of stuff. So you know, it's all these engines, every engine you get is a mixed bag. And, you know, what I try to do, at least with the lobbying I do, or whatever you want to call it, right? Like the bitching on Twitter.
I was about to say that's a very new way of defining lobbying.
Right.
Jason's
Bitching on
tweets.
Twitter. Well, the irony is I can talk to I'm blue in the face. The second that I post something on Twitter, it gets a reaction and people hear about it, and I hear that people hear about it on Unity. Whatever their feedback mechanism is completely broken. And they've isolated people in such a way that they're living in bubbles, and the feedback mechanism you're supposed to use just doesn't work. But you go out on Twitter and you make a fuss of something, suddenly you get a notice. You start SRP life and raise hell about the problems you're seeing, and suddenly you're in a meeting with somebody at Unity. You write to them, you talk to a rep, nothing happens, right? So, and I think that really comes down to the fact that the individuals at Unity really care and want to help, and they're out on Twitter and they see something and they're like, oh shit, and then they pass along that information. But for whatever reason, the organization as a whole is just not functioning in that way. And so, I'm a loud voice. I can be a loud voice, an obnoxious one too. And I don't have a problem with doing that. I just wish it could work better, And when it comes to the actual Unity, like my issue is you want to throw away the standard pipeline and start some new ones. That's fine, right? I'm not afraid of rewriting code. I just don't want to have to do it 3 times every month. You know what I mean? And I don't want to rewrite. Microsplat is finally at the point where there's only 1 or 2 things that aren't working in the SRPs, right? And I know by the time I finally get everything perfect, it's going to be oh, here's a new SRP drop that breaks everything again. You know what I mean? And it's just that, living with that all the time of we've decided that we're going to double down on instability, and we're going to launch internal platforms for an engine that made its reputation on abstracting away platform differences, right?
You're going to double down on instability. I love it.
Yeah, that's literally what they're doing. Every time they don't make a shader abstraction for the SRPs or don't abstract some of these changes that they make, they're doubling down on instability. They're making choices to not make their engine stable. And for users, and specifically asset store users, because we get, the difference of supporting an asset versus writing a game is that I have to write code that runs on HDRP 2019 and HDRP 2020 and URP 2019 and URP 2020 and the standard pipeline. And I have to make it run across all 5 of those. They change something in HDRP and they forget about the past. They don't have to make that work in 2019. They don't have to update it. It's gone. It's done. They're on to 220. Right?
They're no longer supporting that. I mean, that version of Unity is dead to them.
Yeah, I mean, they support it in the sense that they'll go and fix bugs, but they don't, their features don't have to run across multiple pipelines. And Unity to this day, as far as I know, has never written a single thing that runs across all 3 pipelines. There's no shader they've ever written that runs across all 3, right? So they're not dogfooding the fact that these teams are running in different directions. Now the shader graph team is probably trapped in the middle of this, screaming their head off, because they actually do have to. That's the only thing that does have to actually work across pipelines. Everything else, they release an asset on the store. It works for one version of Unity, on one version of the SRP, and then 2 years later they upgrade it to another one and break the old one. Right?
Was it you that told me that the 2 teams are completely independent of each other, never the twain meet?
They're in different countries. I mean, I'm sure they talk. I'm sure there's some communication, right? But from looking at the code, what happened is they ran off in different directions, and it was the shader graph team that had to pull them together, because they had to somehow write a shader graph that would output to both of them without going them completely insane. So you'll see some common abstractions. There's a really nice, there's some good code in there, shader code and stuff. Their texture abstraction is really nice compared to the old one they had. And, they've done some really good work. And the stuff that's shared tends to be the better stuff, because it's been hit by both teams, right? Instead of just being off in URP land or off in HDRP land. So they would actually benefit from really understanding how all this stuff works globally, because I think there's a lot of duplicate code. There's a lot of like, like the custom paths for URP works totally different than it does for HDRP, even though they're both called custom paths. They're actually different classes, it's just a mess. And it's like, I have to deal, even something simple like getting the background color of a camera is different in HDRP than it is in URP.
Really?
Yes, because in HDRP, what they do is they put a special component on the camera called the HDRP additional camera data, which if you open the inspector, it looks like it has nothing on it. It looks like it has no properties. But then what they do is the editor goes, hey, when you set the background color on the camera, I'll secretly set it over here instead. And so then when you go to script it and you're like, hey, I'll get the background color, you're like, why is the background color the wrong color? I keep setting it because it's on a different component now. And they've done like little hacks in the editor to make it seem like it's still part of the camera. When
they make changes and stuff, isn't it going to just screw up all your life now that you're going to?
Yes.
So
absolutely.
You basically removed the headache from everyone else as long as they use better shader.
I've given it to myself.
And you've given yourself. So that's why you were saying earlier you're charging for it, because every time Unity then make a change and break something, you're going to fix it, not them.
Right. So, my preference would be that somehow this gets like Unity, when they make a change, made a change to this code and it was part of Unity and none of us would have to do with this, right? But they have refused to do that, even though they came out and made a big deal about how they were going to do it and then proceeded to do nothing. So yeah, I would much prefer it to be on their end, because the whole point is, they write abstractions for PlayStation versus Xbox so you can run the same code on both. But yet here they introduced 3 pipelines and been like, yeah, we're not going to make them compatible. It's like, it makes no sense. It's not that's not why you license an engine, right?
I love how before you were talking about SRP Life, D-Dow was in chat and just types in SRP Life.
I kind of started that as a joke. I was like, we'll all change our icons to like.
I changed mine.
It's not going away until they fix this. It's not going away.
I had to change my icon back from being purple because it was just, or pink because it was. I had it there for like 3 months.
Right.
Or maybe longer. And I was like, you know what? I'm gonna need to put my picture back. Because it's like a hunger strike. Because I after a while, the hunger strike. You know what I mean? You need to start eating again.
Yeah.
But you mentioned earlier about Amplify, because when Amplify were on, they were saying exactly the same headache about because if you use Amplify Shader instead of using the shader graph, you can make a built-in shader with Amplify Shader and then click the magic button and it would make the same Amplify graph for URP, and you go bloop 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 and it'll make the same Amplify graph for HDRP. And they were like,
because the same thing I'm doing. Yeah. They're fighting through every release with this, which is, again, the economics are a problem here. If this was funded by Unity or like owned by Unity, this layer, then Amplify could just write to that layer and we'd all be done. And the nice thing about better shaders is that you don't have to spit out 3 files. It just compiles it for whichever pipeline you're in. So you have one shader file, right, that's in a simple readable format that's easy to work with, that compiles into, whatever pipeline you're in, right? That's magical. And when you actually look here, like this lit shader, this is the final output of this thing. I have this basically like this packing system that asset store developers can use, and it basically just packs everything into one file, and then when it imports, it just goes, oh, you're in HDRP. Okay, let me unpack HDRP 2019 shader for you. Internally, it has all 5 of the render pipelines in there. And this is only going to grow. It's going to be 7 next year, right? If I need to support 2019 still. At some point, I'll drop 2019 and only support 20 and 21 and 22 or whatever. But, it just every time, and I only support LTS releases except for if people are enterprise customers, that might be different. But
they pay the money, you let them eat at the buffet regardless. If the food's already gone, you're like, what? I'll cook you some extra eggs and sausages.
Right. Well, I'd go in because eventually I'm going to have to deal with whatever random change they make anyway. But it's easier if I do it just on LTS releases, right? It's easier if I go, okay, now's the time of year. I'm going to produce like these adapters for Microsplat for better shaders. And do all the porting, figure out all the new bits, all the stuff they changed, all the new macros, and little hidden things that need to be added. Because shader programming, like, there's a lot of tricks to shader programming and a lot of stuff that's like non-obvious if you haven't done it for a long time. And so they might add some little macro to something somewhere, and that causes like stereo instant VR not to work on everything, right? And when you're also
what if you decide one day that you've had enough?
Then it would be up to whoever wants to do it. Like I mean, it's the same as any software. If you stop supporting it, then it goes away, right? So that's how anything is. But from a game development standpoint, people do this thing where they drag along on the latest beta or tech release of Unity. I think it's really dumb. Like, you should stick a version and be like, okay, we're doing everything in here, and I don't care what new shiny thing comes down the pipe. Unless we really have to upgrade, we're not going to upgrade.
Well, that's the real world of when you're making a game. That's the same thing. And every single person who's come on the stream in an interview, who's worked in a real life project, has said, when you start your game development, you pick a version and you stick to it.
You try to. I mean, there's going to come an event which forces you to upgrade. Like when I did the Star Trek game, we were on 5.0. We got to 5.2 because there were so many bugs. 5.0 when it first released was, it was rough. We got to 5.2, and then we ended up having to upgrade to 5.4 because of the bugs in the asset bundle system. And then Apple came along and said, like, okay, now everything needs to be 64-bit. And Unity was like, oh, crap, and scrambled to get 64-bit working on their end, which meant suddenly that project now needed to be upgraded to 2018. So, like, it's going to happen. But, those are, new Unity in particular makes those more painful, right? Like Unity for ages did the script updater and did all these things. And some of those upgrades were really simple, and yeah, there might be a new bug that hit us that didn't hit us before, but like the actual act of porting wasn't a big deal. If you're working in SRPs and you're writing custom shaders and you're not just sticking with really their shaders or shader graph, then you're in a world of hurt whenever you upgrade. It's not unlike other engines. It's like, I remember Unreal games, it's like when you did an upgrade, it was like, okay, the engine team's going to be down for 2 weeks to do the upgrade, So
that's just to remind people as well. You've tasted more than just Unity, haven't you?
Oh yeah, no. When I started out, there was no licensing of game engines. You had to build it yourself. So first thing I worked on was an MMO, and we built a state-of-the-art MMO engine before the acronym MMO even existed. So
would you like to remind people?
That was all the Turbine stuff, Asheron's Call, and which eventually led to Dungeons and Dragons Online and Lord of the Rings Online and stuff.
I still remember being in an internet cafe, installing Dungeons and Dragons Online on the machines in the internet cafe.
Right.
Okay. It's got dice. It's got dice. It's rolling the dice. I don't know why are you so excited. You have no idea.
And then at Harmonix, that was all custom engines until the very end when we started looking at Unity and Unreal for different projects. A lot of those beat match games you couldn't do in an engine without pretty much ripping out a lot of stuff, because they were so latency sensitive. Nowadays a modern engine has minimum 3-4 frames of latency just to display stuff. And then, you add controller latency and various other latency introduced in the code, and you couldn't make a Rock Band game. Rock Band was all immediate mode rendering, same with Guitar Hero. It was all about reducing latency, so that the second you hit that button, you saw something happen on the screen. And everything was synced to the sound card. So like you didn't get time from the CPU clock, you got it from the audio file you were playing, right? So yeah, custom engines are amazing for being able to get that kind of control. But that's my background, is like that stuff. So I look at Unity and I see some really good stuff and I see some really hard stuff, which is like any engine, right? And if what you're trying to build aligns with what it's good at, then it's a great engine for you. If what you're trying to build doesn't align with that, you're in trouble. I think the problem with Unity is that there's lots of features that seem like they're going to be okay for you until you actually use them. Like using asset bundles on Unity 5.2, it was like, oh, sure, this is exactly what we need, and we can break up our whole game into these little bundles and then download them on demand. And we had 40,000 asset bundles, and like Unity just shit the brick. It was, and we ended up fixing like code in the C++ side of the engine too to deal with some of it. And we got it all working, and then they fixed the asset bundle system and made addressables, which is kind of based off of what we did for the Walking Dead game. And it was nice because we worked directly with Unity on some of that stuff, and so it gets better. But I think the engine went really wide on features at some point, and then wasn't really able to take those features over the 90% mark. You know what I mean?
Yeah. Well, I love you've led perfectly into Gildar's question. Where would you go as a Unity/Asset Store user in this one, in very early stages of a project? What pipeline would you use for desktop? Stick with standard to allow for older assets, or try to work in HDRP?
I'd steer clear of HDRP. URP is more stable. It's going to be getting a bunch of changes and everything, but it's a simpler pipeline overall. Like, URP is basically a cleaned up version of standard. And so it's got a forward renderer. It's getting a deferred renderer soon. And, it's probably going to get some kind of, I don't know, tile plus deferred or something. But it is a straightforward renderer. If you want to change the lighting, if you want to change things in it, it's relatively straightforward. HDRP is a more modern pipeline, and there's lots of like crazy sort of configuration dependency kind of stuff. Even just understanding like how the shaders work there, it's like, it's kind of all baked in. Like they do this thing where they want all the controls on the material. And so then the shader stack is designed around having all these things defined by the material and checking these little bits and stuff. So it's just a lot deeper of a pipeline. It looks better, obviously, but the complexity level is very high. And it's also like much more limiting. Like, you want to render a second camera? Well, that might cost you 6 milliseconds just for the camera setup time, because they didn't really design it to do that, right? Whereas the simpler renderer in URP is much closer to standard. So if I was going to go a render pipeline, I think it would be easier to make URP look high-end than it would be to struggle with HDRP right now. Or you stick with standard, where there's a ton of stuff out there. I think the big question there is around like, what are you trying to do? Like, which parts of the engine are you really trying to push, and which parts are you fine with, okay, this is good enough, right? If you're really trying to push rendering and you have full-time rendering engineers and stuff, then SRPs can make a lot of sense, because you can optimize certain things you couldn't in standard, and you can control things. But if you don't, if you're not trying to be graphically like pushing the boundaries, and you don't have the skills or somebody you're paying $200,000 a year to do that kind of work, then I guess I would stick with standard until I had a reason to move to an SRP.
What's one
Right.
saying? Standard plus better lit shader. So is standard plus better lit shader going to mean that you basically don't need the URP then, Warspawn? Is that that's what he's getting at?
Well, I mean,
Pitch it.
no, not
Marketing.
necessarily.
Marketing. Pitch it.
So better lit, the advantage of better lit is one, you can move your assets between the 3 pipelines, which is nice. But that's not really the biggest concern for most people. The second is that because of the way it packs textures and things like that, it can be more efficient than the same, like using Unity's standard shader or Unity's URP lit shader. And the third is that it has a bunch of these effects for like world space noise and weather and all these things built in. And maybe a fourth is if you're a shader writer, it's like you can use better shaders and use those blocks in your own shaders and customize it. So sort of, depends whether that's useful to you. But, URP is more than just shaders. It's also like how you interface with rendering and I ran into a problem today on a client's thing where in Unity, if you are rendering cascaded shadow maps, it does a depth prepass, whether you need it or not. And that depth prepass on their low-end machines was costing a significant chunk of time. Also in Unity, it does not batch inside the depth prepass. So everything's expensive in there, more expensive than it should be. They're not fixing that bug, right? It's been there since 5.2, and it is not going away. So that's the kind of thing that you could then go into an SRP and you'd be like, you know what? I'm just going to comment out the ability to have a depth prepass, so it won't even have it even if I want it, because again, you have this top level code that's controlling the rendering. So yeah, I mean, I think if you're not into rendering and stuff, I would focus on my game and use whichever tool set has the stuff
We don't make
you need,
mistakes.
right?
We have happy accidents.
If you're fine with standard and you can get what you need done, focus on your game, because where most people get caught up is they spend incredible amounts of time on getting all the graphics and performance and everything, but then their game isn't that good. And then you see this game, like what was the game that came out recently, Valheim or whatever it was? Like people love that game, and apparently it performs. I haven't played it, but apparently it performs terribly because it's like Unity stuff.
Yeah, it depends on what you do. If you're by yourself running around and you start world building or making a load of stuff, it takes about a minute for the screen to finish rendering all the objects and all the assets in the world. But it's fun.
Right.
And that's the important thing. If your game's fun,
they forget about that. Right? They focus on all these things of making performant or whatever, but like if it's not fun, nobody cares.
It's like me,
That's
Jace.
It's not performant, but
it's like me, mate. I mean, the reason I got married is not because I'm 6'7", beautiful, blue-eyed, muscular Adonis. It's probably because I'm funny. And they were like, you know what? It doesn't matter that he's a short, hobbly goblin.
Right.
It doesn't matter. Because he's funny.
More important.
Yeah, exactly. I enjoyed myself being with him rather than looking at him, and that's the same as if people can get that in their games. If they take away the enjoyment of playing the game, they forget how it looks. Now, do you remember the old saying, Jace? Don't revisit a memory. Don't go back to an old game you played in your childhood or your youth, because it won't look the same, will it?
Right.
Because your mind has created its own rendering, like your mind was the rendering engine of it, and it made it better than what it really was. Jet Set Willy and Chucky Egg didn't look like AAA PlayStation 5 games, but that's how we remember it.
Right, because it was at the time. Yeah. I mean, the thing is like, a lot of people buy my assets who, they enjoy this one part of game development, right? They enjoy making terrains, or they enjoy, some particular part of it, and maybe they'll never ship, and that's fine. But I think when it comes to actually, like, if your goal is to ship games, it's entirely about the gameplay experience, right? And one of the things that kind of has moved me away from, because I was like creative director for a while. I was very involved in the design of games and things like that. Was really just the change to free to play, because the game design suddenly had to contend with the business model, and the business model kind of wins most of the time. And so that made game design really not fun for me in a lot of ways, right? Because to me, I just like making the coolest thing I can make. And so, I can go make assets and do shader work and make really cool stuff. So I'm going to do that. But I think at the end of the day, like even the business model and things like that are kind of ancillary to fun, right? If you make a great product and you suddenly get millions of people playing it because it's really fun, you'll figure out how to monetize it. You'll figure out how it makes money, Better if you figured that out first, but the fun is the thing that most people can't figure out,
If you build it, they will come.
Well, this is why I don't focus on marketing so much, right? Like, and I focus more on, it kind of fits with my whole mythology, just to make cool stuff, because that's what I like to do. I don't like the other stuff, so I'm not going to do it.
That's why you like music.
Yeah, and I think one of the things I like the most about music is watching people try to create in real time. It's stressful as hell for me when I try to do that, like improvising. But the people that really have the knack for that, who can just play and they just go with whatever's going on in the moment, and the whole band moves as one. Like it's an amazing thing to see, because they're just creating something in that very moment that's unique. It's never going to happen again. It represents that very moment. Whatever the feeling is not going to be the same ever again. And that's like, that's kind of the rawest version of creativity that I know of, right?
God, you're making me want to go back to a jazz bar now.
I mean, I'm dying for things to open up so I can.
I'm gonna have to get my double vax before that happens. Jace,
yeah,
talking about magical vaccines or magic pills. Now, one of the things that Unity did was that convert your materials. We've got a question in chat. Do you do it? Do you have a special button that you will convert with better lit shaders?
Conversion. I do a minor conversion, which is basically like, hey, if you happen to have like a main texture in, because the problem is I'm not converting from standard to HDRP. I'm converting from HDRP standard or lit to mine, right? So there's 3 different decodable pipelines. But what I do is basically like, if you take a shader that's been done, it will like try to get the textures from it. So it will grab the main texture in the normal map and get them on there so that at least it's like basically there. The other thing is that not all the shader parameters are the same. Like I do have the smoothness remapping, which is something that exists in HDRP, but that doesn't exist in standard or URP. So the mapping from standard to many different shaders is basically easier than doing the mapping from many different shaders to one shader, right? So I just map the things that I can, which is basically like, let's grab your main textures and stick them in there. Like let me just make a shader really quick. If I make a lit shader.
He's making a shader, everyone.
No, I'm making a material.
He's making a material, everyone.
So I'm just going to put the moss normal. I haven't tried this in a while, so hopefully it still works. But I'm going to set the smoothness way up, and so you'll see that the smoothness does not get converted. But when I switch to better lit, yeah, see it has the albedo and normal still assigned, but the smoothness isn't, because in standard they don't use the same mapping for this stuff. They have the smoothness remapping and stuff. Oh, it did convert the smoothness. It's 1. Oh, so it managed to convert some of them. So yeah, but like, depending on which shader you have, like if I go back to the lit here, where's the URP lit? Standard. I cannot see today. Here we go. So in the lit one here, they don't have smoothness remapping like HDRP does. There's just so much stuff that's missing from what HDRP has or what standard has. It's all different. So, my compromise here was like, just get the textures on there. So like people recognize what they're working on, and then they can go in and tweak things with the new capabilities.
There's your mucking about, changing them. You're asking chat, can you do that in bulk, or is it only one by one you're clicking them and changing? If you select like 10 materials.
I don't know. I mean, can you bulk edit? What you could do is just grab your shader. So like, yeah, look, I've selected. I can go up here and just set them both to be better lit, right? Or set them both to be unlit or whatever, right? So yeah, it'll let me bulk switch stuff. You just select all the materials.
Yeah, lovely, jubbly. Now I know we mentioned something right at the beginning. We said we're going to come back to it, and I got a feeling that we might end up missing it. It was the different UV modes, wasn't it? It was a question about UV modes for noobs. So in your main layer, you've got UV mode drop down there in the better lit shaders.
Yeah. So every layer gets this drop down, and basically your choices are triplanar and UVs. So tri-planar texturing is kind of designed to prevent stretching, but the basic idea is that imagine that you took a flashlight and you shone the texture onto each side of your object. You had like, of the 6 sides, right? And so the advantage of this is that this is just a cube here, this wall. And if you'll notice, the bricks are still the right size here. The bricks aren't triplanar. That's what it is. I'll switch the bricks to triplanar. Texture layer 1 is the bricks. So if we switch this to triplanar, and I don't know how we can see these bricks here, but you'll see that now the bricks are the same size as they are on the other side, right? Because we're just projecting this. It's also currently in world space, so they will slide as we move this thing around, right? We can switch that though. We can choose to do it in local space. In local space, they stay with the object. Right, so now the bricks aren't sliding around. Notice the noise is though, so where the bricks and the other stuff is, but they'll stick to the object. And then if you switch back to UV space, we have some options there, which is using the first or second UV channel of the model, or you can project on a particular axis. So if you do project on X, you can see that it's just smeared across the side because the X axis is this red arrow. I don't know if you guys know this, but RGB is X, Y, and Z, right?
Wow. Really? I did not know that.
Yeah. So, and that's because it's the matrix that you're looking at. These arrows, if you know what a matrix is, these are the 3 vectors of the matrix of this object. So if I rotate this object, what you'll see.
Matrix Reloaded and Matrix Revolutions.
Exactly, like the crappy love story. Where's the thing to put them? Anyway, if this was in local mode, you'd see those 3 arrows pointing. So if you ever want to know what a matrix transform is, when you see those things in Unity, it's just like this little gizmo hand. It's 3 vectors that tell you which direction things point. So yeah, you can project from the top. You can project from the bottom, from the sides. So the cool thing about this is that the noise is also available in all of these spaces. So as an example, the snow is actually just projected down. If it wasn't, we would see the UV seam on the top of this thing, right? And the triplanar here fixes that too, because it's projecting from the top, or from whichever sides, projecting from all the sides. And so there's actually a contrast that controls the blending between that, which is parallax, triplanar contrast right here. And so if I lower that, it gets blurry because it's just kind of smushing them all together. If I raise it, it height blends them, which looks a bit nicer. And there's also the stochastic, which I really haven't talked about, but if you're not familiar with stochastic, it's definitely like the best thing ever for dealing with tiling textures. Here's an example of distance resampling. This is also called mixed mapping, and basically you just fade in to another version of the texture that's sampled at different like UVs at a distance, and so it can help make your texture look like it's got texture further away.
Like
But if I
LODs for textures.
Right, it just won't turn into mush as soon. So if I turn, you can see how this is tiling over here. It's tiling a whole bunch of times. If I turn stochastic on, you can't see any tiling anymore.
That's lovely.
Right? And you can play with the controls here to change it, but it basically like synthesizes a new texture in the shader from your data and eliminates all tiling.
I was trying really hard
and
to
that's
see the
available.
tiling. I was like, surely I can find this. And I was like, no, I can't.
Well, you can see it now,
but
right?
now you can. Yeah, because you turned it off.
Yeah. If I turn this on, you can't see it.
It's beautiful. I remember when you added it to Microsplat and you came on the stream and they were very excited.
Well, yeah. The interesting thing about this is Eric, what's his last name? He works for Unity, actually, and he did the original implementation of this kind of idea and released a big paper on it, and it was very complex in the way it worked. It did all this stuff that required it to only have, textures in DXT format, and it was really just a bunch of stuff to basically manage how it was blended by color. And I just went, you know what, it'd be easier with a height blend, and then boom. And I was like, oh, this is so much easier. So that's become this is the technique now I see everybody copying, is using this one, because it doesn't require pre-processing your textures and all this other stuff.
You
and
showed
so I think
people the way. You gave them the path.
So that's a really nice technique that you can do on any layer. You can do it independently. So with all this, you're one example of why you might want to mix these is you might want your detail texture tiled a whole bunch of times. And so you decide the detail texture, I want that to be tri-planar and I want that to have stochastic sampling. But then if I was modeling a rock out of ZBrush, I might have this normal map that's meant to fit over the whole object. So your main layer could have that normal map, and then your detail texture layer or another texture layer can do all the tri-planar and stuff to do the tiling side of it. So that ends up being super powerful. And this is all stuff, a lot of this stuff is available in HDRP, but on different shaders, they have Stacklit, which lets you do texture layers, but then it doesn't have any noise functions. And then they let you do a regular one, which can do tri-planar, but they don't let you do that on individual layers. So I basically just consolidated a lot of the stuff and added a bunch of my own sort of secret sauce to it and shipped it for all 3 pipelines. So
I can't wait for Amplify to hook into this, so that.
Yeah, I gotta ping those guys again. They were kind of oh yeah, well check this out, and then I didn't hear from them since. So I should write them again and see, because it would be really, to me, the ultimate thing is that somebody like myself can produce a really high performance base shader that does whatever it needs to do, and they can have an artist come along and say, you know what, I just need to add a tint mask to that. And they can just make a little tint mask thing in Amplify, which is the language they know, and then they can just add it to the shader, right? And they don't have to rebuild everything I've done, That's really cool. And then they go, oh yeah, we need this to work with Vegetation Studio, so they just add that chunk to it. They don't have to understand how it works. They don't have to code it or merge it or anything. They just add this stuff together, and the team can work in whatever manner it wants to, right?
Have you just basically you've given yourself a headache, as we said earlier. You've put the burdens of the world on your shoulders so that the rest of us can sleep easy at night?
I wouldn't go so far as to say the whole world, but the world that wants to use SRPs and write shaders in text, yes. Amplify has the burden for the world that wants to write shaders and shader graphs.
Because we had,
and we're both doing the same.
In chat we had earlier where who was it in chat that was saying it? Black Mage, who was it? Ocular Malice was saying it, that he wouldn't write a shader by hand. He would modify somebody else's. He would hack,
right?
But he wouldn't write one from scratch.
Right. So this is the cool thing about having stackables, is that it's much easier to do that because, for instance, like, if you look at, where are we here? If you look at the lit base shader, this guy is 365 lines of code, okay? And that includes the detail texturing, like parallax, and then one of the cool things is the tessellation shader just inherits its subshaders in, or sorry, I do it the other way. I subshader in, oh wait, I'm looking at the wrong one. Here we go. Tessellation base. So all this does is bring in the lit shader, so it gets all that stuff from the lit shader, and then it just does the tessellation part. So it's just the tessellation part, and there's no surface function, right? Like, it doesn't do anything to the pixels. So you can just concern yourself with the one piece of code you want to add or write or change instead of how the whole shader works as a whole, which is wonderful. Like, I've had these benefits because of the way the Microspat module system works. I've been writing shaders like this for a long time. They were still, like, some of those module files are pretty big, so it was still a lot to manage. But like with this, it's like really nice, manageable chunks of code. Like, even the thing that adds an extra texture layer, okay, that's the biggest one. It's 515 lines of code. But snow is, what is snow? 270. And again, you modify this little root piece of code, and everything that uses it is updated, right?
So I love these because everyone loves your old hash include back in the day. You don't need to write everything. You just go include this. Yeah, and then everything that's included is using it.
Yep.
I miss those
so like
days.
Here's the dissolve shader, right? Like, again, it's just a little bit of code. It has its properties and its variables. And then great, now you add this to anything and it can do the dissolve effect, right? And you'll notice that all of these, if I just create a material for this, here we just have the dissolve effect. That's all it is, right? And it just works on a unit sphere. It's, because it's only compiling that part of the shader. Each of these are complete shaders. You're just stacking them together to create a bigger one.
An Uber shader.
Right? Yeah. And so it makes managing the shader code, it makes managing features, like, if this was just base and everything, then you could just sell packs of features, right? You wouldn't even need to put together the final shader, and then the user is just like, oh yeah, I want this feature, this feature, this feature, this feature, and drags them together, and there you go.
Oh my God. I can just imagine now, D. Dowie's next asset on the asset store is a collection of little modules, little mini shaders for people to use with Better Shader.
I would totally love to work that way. The problem is that Better Shaders is never going to sell enough for that to be a market, right? This is, again, why it would be better if it was part of Unity and they had written this type of abstraction layer and modernized the shader platform. Because, the shaders have been the same for a long time. They get new things added. We now have compute shaders, like we have new types of shaders, new stages, but like the fundamental process of authoring them is really based in, like, it runs through a C preprocessor. It's like, it's pretty basic, right? And there's just so much more you can do these days, and it's not hard. I didn't spend years building this, right? Like, I hacked most of this together in a week, and then spent a bunch of time like debugging edge cases and building Better Lit on top of it.
Talking about earlier when I mentioned that, what if one day you get bored or annoyed and you decide to stop supporting Better Shader or Better Lit Shader? Barak saying, I know very few people use it, but will One Batch support Better Lit shaders? Do you remember One Batch, Chase?
Yeah, I do. I remember it.
I loved One Batch. Are you still working on updating it, taking advantage of your new knowledge?
The problem with One Batch is that it requires you building any shader that you want to support into it, right? Like, so, I supported just standard pipeline, and I supported everything that was done with the standard shaders, and that was great. And it worked really well for the game I was trying to optimize at the time, because they had a specific problem there to solve. But if you want URP support, then you're basically roped into making a one-to-one exact copy of the URP shaders, right? So if I did that, and I tried to there's two ways to do that. One is to take the Unity source code and modify it to do all the texture array lookups and stuff. That's what I did for the standard pipeline. And that will make sure that everything works perfectly and exactly the same. The other is to write it in something like Better Shaders, but now you have the problem of, well, not only do these shaders, then you have to perfectly emulate their shader, right? But you also now have to deal with the fact that it's no longer really cross-compatible because HDRP works totally different anyway. So you can't really use the abstraction. And so I've kind of let that asset just sit there because I don't know. It's kind of with the current state of SRPs and all this mess we're in, it doesn't make sense for the number of sales it gets to spend time trying to support more pipelines for it.
But it does its job for those who are using the standard.
Oh yeah, no, it's a neat little system. It makes it really easy to just take a bunch of crappily made kit bashed artwork and just optimize it down. I mean, that's what you want, though, right?
It is what you want.
You look
especially when you're buying lots of random art from the asset store.
Yeah, the whole point of Nanite is that they can just, go scan stuff and then kit bash it all together in a big giant mess, and then UE5 is just going to render it, and it's just going to work. That's beautiful. As much as I love well-designed assets and art and all these things, being able to throw crap in there and just have it work is even better, because then you don't have to spend time being perfect about all these things, right? You can just scan some data, whatever, just get it, throw it in, make it look good. Once it looks good, you're done, right? So
true, Jace.
Yeah,
I love it.
I love the artistry of crafting nice LODs and getting everything right, but it's ultimately it's janitorial work. It's not the art that you want to spend time on, right?
Talking about UE5, how long until Jason Booth jumps ship and starts being on the Unreal Marketplace? Are you already on the Unreal Marketplace?
No, I built an asset for them a while back, and then they gave me a grant, and then they announced UE5, and I was kind of excited to get on there, but I couldn't find a way to get around their sort of forced graph stuff, and I can't do the optimizations that I really wanted to bring over there for terrain and stuff. I can't do without handwriting code. You can't do it in a shader graph. They don't support branching correctly. Neither does Unity. So it sort of stuck me dead in the water, and then I just said, okay, so what I'm going to do is hold off on this budget until I get a copy of UE5 and look at the new tech and figure out some totally different product, right? Some interesting thing that I see a market for and build something over there, rather than, because originally I was going to port a bunch of the Microspat kind of stuff to make because their trains are really slow and they're heavy to render and stuff, and I was like, oh, I can make that all faster, but I can't with the access to the shader that they provide without being in essentially another SRP kind of case where I'm writing stuff really low level and having to track their changes, and I just can't do that for two engines. So I'll probably get back to UE5 and come up with something at some point, because I feel like I kind of owe them that for supporting me. It'll happen. It's just what's the right product? What's the interesting thing that I feel like I can provide that would be really cool over there? And then I'll just see how the market is over there. I hear it's not as big, but it might be fun. So we'll see.
And talking about providing things, nice little segue. You got some presents to provide into the chat?
Oh yeah, do we want to? What should we give away? Some better lit?
Well, should we? I tell you what. Just whatever you do, don't generate the keys now of your screen share.
Right. Right. I'm going to shut off the screen share, then I'm going to generate the keys.
Right. So
then they'll be gone before anybody gets them.
We've got. I've stopped sharing your screen. By the way, I've stopped.
All right, so I'm going to stop sharing.
No, but yeah, if you want to extra safe. So
All right.
I was going to say, you've currently got, those who don't know, Better Shaders is in the sale.
Better Shaders is, Better Lit isn't.
Exactly.
So I kind of made a mistake. Better Shaders launched right in the middle of the sale, which is a bad time to launch an asset. And it's selling pretty well, but comparative to things that are on sale, right? So it'd probably be doing really well in the rankings right now, if not for the sale. And then by the time the sale's over, I'm worried that, like, you know, I don't know, the initial boost or whatever won't be there. So, it is what it is.
That was good timing. That's your marketing skills at it.
That's my marketing at work.
So Jay, can I be cheeky then? Because it's in the sale at the moment. Have you got any left for? Can we do one of each?
Of which?
One, a better shader giveaway and a better lit shader giveaway.
Sure.
Because I know you only get 12 a year of each, and
yeah, but the only time I use them is here.
that is true. So that probably means that you've got a Microsplat laying around. So about Microsplat, we had a question in chat. Black Mage uses HDRP, Jace. Okay, he can't get away from it, so he's tied in. He's got no choice. He's married it. It's having his baby. He can't abandon the relationship now. It's a responsible adult. So he's saying, if using HDRP, is it worth converting to Microsplat? And how would the transition go? Having 8 textures sucks, but I will have done a lot of work. But I have done a lot of work. Will it convert with no problems? Will I need to repaint the textures?
No, you don't have to do anything like that. You just you're going to add the component to the terrain. You hit convert. It may or may not convert the shader into HDRP on the first try, and then you select the material and convert the shader. There's a render pipeline option. It's like the second option on the material, and you switch that to HDRP 2020, and then it'll render for HDRP, and then you can start turning on all the things like, you know, first of all, if it supports 32 textures, fine. So you're no longer limited to 8. It will render, it uses a higher packed format, so it'll probably render faster. It's got a ton of features that Unity's doesn't have. So yeah, it should all be fine. And it doesn't edit the splat maps or anything like that, so it's not going to like delete your work or anything. Talking
about Microsplat, then, have you got any keys for your Uber collection?
Give me a second.
Because we just had people in chat going, "Oh, I would love to have a copy of Microsplat complete." Well, you can get it if you buy it from the asset store. That's for one thing. If I do exclamation mark Microsplat. So is it on the sale, Microsplat bundle?
It is, and it was also featured for the one-day sale.
It was, wasn't it? In the 70%. Yeah.
Yeah. So that was I was like, am I really going to do this for that little? But then it you know, on those sales, people just see a deal like that and they just go for it even if they don't need it. So you know, it worked out pretty well.
You're not going to tell us how well it worked out, though.
I made more in that one day than I made in the previous 2 months on the asset store.
Wow.
So it was like a big one-day boost, and support requests increased a little, but not proportionate to how many copies it sold. You know, like.
I was about to say, because you've got like 3 reviews. So if support requests are in line with how many people review something, you're in luck. Right.
No, they're not. Their support requests are, I don't know, they're weird. And some days nothing's on sale or anything, and suddenly I get a swarm of people, and it's just like crazy. And I don't know how it happens, but you know, but it was a great day. But I mean, that's the thing with all of these stores, like the asset store, app store, any of these stores. If you're getting a big front page promotion like that, it's usually worth it, whatever the deal is, because that kind of real estate is extremely valuable. You know, like I don't know if this is true or not, but when I was doing mobile development, they were like, it would cost us many millions of dollars to get the same marketing boost that one day of being featured by Apple gets you, you know? And so yeah, so, you know, a whole bunch of people bought it. I'm sure not all of them are even using it, but.
Well, I love in chat. Well, you don't know you need it until you need it. Then we're not so sure. Warspawn asks, does Unity eat any of their 30% cut during the sales? Or is it all on the asset?
No.
Oh my God. So they basically going, we'll put you in a sale and we'll force your asset to be down 70% off, but we're still taking the 30% of that.
They take 30% of that cost. They don't take 30% and leave you with nothing. You know, it's not 30% of the original price. It's 30% of whatever they sell at. Right. So if they sell your asset for $50, they get 30% of that. If they sell it at $100, they get 30% of that.
And they're basically saying, look, we're putting you on the front page, so it's well worth it.
Yeah, I mean, you know, it always has been. Every time I've signed up for one of Unity sales, and I'm like, oh God, you know, like it always works out. They, you know, just that again, it's just like, you know, you see these assets that are sitting at the front page. The reason they're sitting there is because once you get there, it's going to get you so many sales that you'll probably never leave. You know what I mean?
So just reminding people, everyone was spamming raffle in chat before the raffle started. Now the raffle started, everyone's forgotten to spam chat. So raffle has actually started. So yeah, the raffle's going on. It's for better shaders. In chat, everyone's like, "What? Hang on a minute, raffle started." Yeah, raffle started.
Yeah, hopefully people that sign up for better shaders are people that write shaders, because that's what it's targeted for. You know, if there's somebody out there who's you know is actually going to use it to write shaders, that would be the better candidate.
If somebody buys better shader, right? But somebody's now gone and bought better shaders while it's in the sale, and gets it and goes, like, you know, it doesn't make my shaders for me automatically 1 star. Are those the type of things that you're getting, or are you getting people who buy it and go, I actually know what a shader is?
I have had a couple people who expect me then to like give them private lessons on shaders, and I had one guy.
So the $40 on sale is like, you will now teach me shaders.
Right. Well, there's a lot of that in the asset store. There's a lot of like, hey, I bought this thing for $5, so will you like screen share and like download my whole game and help me fix this bug? And you're like, no, you know. And then they get pissed if you say no. If you say no to somebody, they like it's like they've never heard the word before a lot of the time. And you know, I have no problem telling somebody off or telling them to go fuck themselves. I don't.
You're not allowed to say fudge your bugger.
Problem. You know, I had a company recently, a game company that I looked up, and they have VC investment at like $5 million or something, and they were trying to get a free copy of the 2020 adapter, which is a $10 upgrade. And I'm sitting there and I'm like, okay, you're paying employees like how much a year? If they're spending more than 3 minutes doing this, then you're losing money by trying to get a discount, you know? And it's just ridiculous. Like, people have really bad sort of judges of value in a lot of ways, you know. But yeah, and then you know, it's like people expect me to like sit there and read the manual to them, you know. And I'm like, they get mad if I tell them to go read the manual or read the FAQ. And it's just like, I'll just kick them out of my Discord, because I'm like, I don't, you know, I have time for people who come in here and show some general respect and need help, you know, and like can, you know, ask an intelligent question, you know, not
like me.
who come in like, can you read the asset store listing to me? It's like, no, you know.
They've got a question: how much for a 2-hour lesson? Now, as we mentioned earlier, Shader Legend, General Shader Legend, not as Unity, Shader Legend, Jason Booth, you know, has been making shaders for before a lot of you were even born. So if somebody was going to come and go like, would you open class and teach me shaders? How much would it cost for 2 hours of your time? would you charge your hourly rate, or do you have like a specific teaching hourly rate that's different from your shader?
I would probably try to get multiple people to do it so that the rate for the student could be reasonable and I could, still make my rate. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah, it's the same as the project management training, like agile training. You get called in to give.
It's also like
that.
If you're teaching somebody one-on-one, there's some real value there you get from being one-on-one, but it isn't reduced that much by teaching 4 people. You know what I mean? When you're at 30 people, it's totally different. But
I used to pay a lot more money for my kung fu lessons one-on-one on a Saturday.
Oh yeah.
But the difference is, you've got your teacher one-on-one beating the crap out of you, and you're not spreading out the bruises with other people. When it's with shaders, if you're doing one-on-one, you're just going to be spamming that teacher with all your shader questions, I suppose.
I don't know. Yeah.
So people can reach out to you on Discord for when they're organizing their shader party. Oh my God, Jace!
Right. If they need
shader party, it's a shader party. That's it.
I like teaching class, but I prefer to do it in person because I find that one explanation for something doesn't work for everyone, and so the process of seeing who's confused and who's getting it, and then trying a different angle to explain it until everybody kind of gets it, like it's been interesting watching like my kids doing Zoom school and stuff and realizing like how hard it is for teachers to make sure that they are getting things when they don't have that feedback a lot of the time,
But it's easy if you're going into an office place and you're giving that group, like
it's certainly
if
easier.
It's a company, like a company's making a game and they need to get everyone up to speed. Like you mentioned, if people missed it at the start of the chat, Jason, if you've got a team of devs who know how to write shaders, your game generally is going to be better. It's going to be, the workflow is going to be better. It's going to be optimized better. Everything's going to be better.
Yes.
And a game dev company, or an indie company of people might go, you know what, it's worthwhile paying Jason for a day, half a day to do all of us together in a room and get like a crash course in shaders.
Well, what generally happens is you teach a whole bunch of people, and out of them there's 2 or 3 that like get it and like enjoy it and are like, oh my God, this opens up so many things. And if you, and then they might be programmers and they might be artists, right? Like I've taught shader graph classes too, because I think shader graphs are really a good way for certain people to learn shaders. But those 2 or 3 people a year later are like super powerhouses on their team. Like when I've gone to colleges, I'm constantly trying to get them to teach shaders as part of their curriculum, because if they did, those people would, 1, be in high demand coming right out of school, and 2, be able to move into those companies and make moves right away, right, to improve things. And then other people start to rely on them. It's like a wonderful thing if you're new in the industry and you're trying to break in. If you know how to write shaders, you're going to be fine, right? If you really understand that stuff, like you're going to be in high demand and people are going to quickly start relying on you for their work.
Oh, you're listening to that, chat. You've just been given great advice of how to get a leg up. How to get a leg up these days. Let's announce the winner. Okay, talking about shaders. Jace, I need you to do a drum roll, being the musician, because we got a winner for better shaders.
I'll do it on my railing.
Whatever you're beating, as long as it's family friendly. And the winner is Nibble Naught. Nibble Naught. Congratulations, Nibbles. Talking about Valheim, Nibble Naught made a lovely house on my Valheim server. Nibble Naught says, well, I guess I'm learning shaders. That's right, you are going to be learning shaders. And if anyone wants to pick up a shader course, Penny from Holistic 3D has got a shader course over on our website. I don't know, did we make a command? Exclamation mark, Holistic 3D? Yes, we did. There you go. So there you go. Go and check out Penny at Holistic 3D and start learning shaders. Talking about another wonderful shader person, Harry Alice Avakis was on the stream over at Christmas time. That's a shader guru.
What did you write?
You know Harry Alisavakis? He does.
I don't know from the name. What did you write?
He just does shader stuff. He's got a blog, technically.
We don't make mistakes.
And he does the built-in. He doesn't.
Yeah, I know who you're talking about. Yeah,
he's just known as one name, Harry, like
right,
like Cher on Twitter.
Yeah, no, I know who you're talking about. He does the diagrams of stuff that are really like one-page breakdowns of how something works. Yeah, no, I love that stuff because it's. There was a design talk recently, or I don't know, probably 10 years ago now. But it was a designer who did that for all of his designs. He was like, he would work on a design until he could get it explained in one page, in like one diagram. And I'm like, that's awesome.
Yeah, I'm not there yet. I can't even do that with.
Yeah, well, that's when you can do that. You know, you thought about it, right? Like you understand it at that point.
Do you know what I used to love doing? That was me as a kid in school, Jace. In even all the way like through school and up into college, all of my projects, I used to then do the instruction, like the breakdown of how I would, like if it was screen printing, if I made a screen printing art. By the way, raffles open for Better Lit Shader. Put your exclamation mark raffles in chat. I would then do like the manual of the drawings of me, how I made the lino printing or something like that, with screen printing, whatever it was, because it was important to show like how you did the work. But I felt like it was part of the project that was towards the final grade. Like, oh, your artwork might be nice, but yeah, here's the background. Here's like, you know, the work in progress. Here's the dev log before we even had those of how they were done. But that's kind of lost nowadays. People just want instant results, gratification, and not really worry about how they got there.
There's still, I don't know, I still feel like there's people out there who are really interested in the craft of something, you know, and those are always the people who are going to get far with it anyway, because you're trying to understand something deeply, and so then you're often right when you write stuff like that, you're writing to a smaller audience than the masses or whatever, and so they write less to it. But like, I don't know, if I go to a GDC or something like that, I want to see like hardcore stuff that really gets into the meat. And when you see my talks, they're just like technical breakdowns, like techniques, blah blah blah, you know. And that's because that's what I want to see in a talk, you know. I want to see how it's built and all this stuff. But that's because I consider myself like a craftsman of my craft, right? And so I think there's always going to be those people, but they're not going to be the masses, and that's fine, you know.
You are a craftsman, Jace. Yeah, you're also a beautiful badger. Don't forget, give exclamation mark raffles in chat. And to those who missed,
got to run because I was supposed to meet a friend like 10 minutes ago.
Yeah, we did say it was going to be 1 hour. All right, we've got this raffle.
Yeah, we didn't leave that.
Oh, we've got. You didn't believe that? And then we've got a raffle.
You wrote the next line you wrote was that means it's probably going to be 2.
Well, I'm glad you acknowledged it.
No. I mean, we open eyes, right?
Exactly. Well, we've enjoyed each other's company, and as we're just waiting for this raffle to run down for the Better Lit Shader, can you just explain to those people who missed the start the difference between Better Lit Shader versus Better Shaders? Because it's a common question.
Better Shaders is if you want to write shaders that work across all pipelines in a very nice, easy to work with format. That's who it's for. Better Lit Shader is a replacement for the standard and lit shaders on all 3 pipelines with a bunch of new cool features and procedural damage and all kinds of flexibility. So that's the difference.
There you go. Brilliant. All right. So we've got the raffle now for Better Lit Shader. The winner is, give me a drum roll. I can't hear a drum. You got to beat your thing.
Oh, I do have something. I'll beat the laptop.
There you go. IRQI3I. Make sure you are a follower. And you are following.
What a name.
You gotta speak up in chat. Speak up in chat. IRQL31. I believe that's what it is. Hit me up on the Discord, please. Send me a message on Discord. Make sure your Twitch and your Discords are linked so that it proves that it is you. I'm here. I'm here. Exclamation mark Discord in chat. Thank you, Yolan. So link your Twitch and your Discord, and then send me a DM to prove that you're here. And did you say, Jace, that you're giving away the ultimate Microsplat bundle?
Yeah, I gave you a voucher for that.
Oh,
I gave you one better shaders and one ultimate bundle.
Hang on. What? You've given what with the what? You gave 2 ones for better lit.
2 better lit, 1 better shaders, and then 1 ultimate bundle.
Oh my word! I'll have to do another raffle for the better lit then. I just cleared the candidate. Well, we're going to do a Microsplat one now because Jace needs to go.
And I'm going to get going.
Jace, I'm going to keep on raffling. I can raffle without you here, mate. It's always a pleasure. I apologise for this 1 hour stream to go on for 2 hours, as it was. As it was raw.
I mean, it's always fun. So,
mate,
but yeah, I'm sure we'll do another one when I ship something else.
Yeah, it's every 3 to 4 months you're on the show. So I've got bookings up until August. So I expect to see you in August then.
All right, we'll do it.
All right, buddy.
All right, bye.
What a beautiful badger. What a beautiful badger. He is the legend that is Jason Booth.
If you want to see more of my crazy videos, click on the left side of your screen now. And down below, there's that big juicy subscribe button. And right next to it is the magic bell that if you click it, it will tell you if I've got a new video coming out. Till next time.